But what I do want to share with you, and I just want to do a couple of stories and a couple of quotes tonight, and I've got 11 minutes to go, is just simply this. This is the second nicest community in the world after the one you come from. It's an amazing place. It's in New Zealand. It's called Kaikoura. But in 1987, 88, this place was in all sorts of trouble. Agriculture had collapsed. The fishing industry collapsed. Their railway service centre in one day went from 260 jobs to one. This is a town of 4,000 people that were reeling, and particularly the group who made up 70% of its population, the local indigenous Maoris, were suffering from unemployment. They had a 95% unemployment rate. It was a community in crisis. But it's interesting to see how in 20 years it's reinvented itself. It's amazing. And it's actually embraced this industry. It is the world's biggest and fastest growing industry called tourism. Have a look at that. In 20 years ago, 3,500 international visitors. 20 years on, 650,000. An amazing kind of like reinvention for a community that's 3 hours from a major city on a road to nowhere. What I find absolutely amazing is kind of like the business life that's been created by all of that, and the fact that 80% of that change is ordinary people starting to get into business, and particularly local Maori people. But what I find even more amazing is that one business has actually driven it, and that's a business created by the most disadvantaged group in town. Local people creating a whale watch business. And what I find exciting about this is that back there in 1989, unemployed Maoris came together in their marae, sat out and started talking not about their problems and how bad it was they were all unemployed, but what is it we've got? They were a group who started to look at their assets. They had meetings where people didn't talk about the problems, they talked about opportunities and what were their assets. And one night, one young guy said, you know, out there in that ocean, at any one time of the year, we've got 100 whales. You know, we know all about those whales. Legend has it that we arrived in this country on the back of a whale. We know about these whales because our fathers, our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers were fishermen. We know all about them. Wonder whether people will pay to come and see them. And so this group started to test an idea, starting with a natural asset that actually sat out there in the ocean. They mortgaged their houses. They were poor people, but they decided to take some risk. They certainly weren't greatly assisted by government. And you know what I find incredible is that they did mortgage their houses to buy this. A boat to take out 16 people 4 times a day is how they started 20 years ago. They started with an asset, and with that asset they created a window of opportunity. Have a look what's happened in 20 years. Today they're the biggest employer in town. Today, they actually have 200,000 customers in any one year. They won the British Airways Best Ecotourism Award. And besides running a whale watch business, this group, who were 95% unemployed, few kind of like financial assets, now run the biggest coach company on the South Island of New Zealand. They run the biggest aquaculture farm in New Zealand. They've got a chain of 9 coffee shops, and all the new technology in Australian airports to do with our new anti-terrorism arrangements comes from their company. Isn't that an incredible story? And this is a group who decided to look at their assets and do something with it and take some risk. This is Kaikoura. It's still only a community of 4,000, but have a look at their latest initiative. It's building an international whale watch research and conference centre. An amazing story. This is the latest story, and that's 20 years of development. An amazing story by a group who were 95% unemployed. And you know, at the heart of it was one of their greatest assets, a young guy, Wally Stone. You know why he's famous? He's the youngest convicted drug dealer in New Zealand's history. At age 10, was found peddling drugs. He went to a reform school, did community work, believed in this ABCD stuff, came back to his hometown as the project person, convinced them. He was the one who said, look at these whales. He became the general manager. And believe it or not, for the last decade, he has also been the country's chairman of their tourism board. Probably the second most important position in New Zealand after the Prime Minister is the person who heads tourism. No country does tourism better than New Zealand. And this is the guy who's done it. And he is the youngest convicted drug dealer in New Zealand's history. He was incredibly enterprising at a very early age. And so, number 5, the strength of a community is directly proportional to the level that the diversity of its residents desire and able to contribute their abilities and assets to the well-being of the community. We've got to believe that. We've got to develop that passion to see that everyone has kind of like got a capacity to contribute. And you know what I reckon is the greatest asset in every community is that group. They're called young women and men. And yet, how often through a thing I call adultism, we discount their contribution. You know, adultism is as bad as sexism and racism. It is saying that because of their lack of experience, we shouldn't take them as serious. We shouldn't involve them. And yet, you know, we're doing what history has told us all the time. We see them as causing problems, having problems, and are problems, you know? That's how we see young people. We always have. Look what Socrates said 2,500 years ago. You know, they have our youth of today love luxury, bad manners, contempt of authority. What kind of awful creatures will they be when they grow up, you know? You know, look what Oscar Wilde said. The youth of the present day are quite monstrous. They have absolutely no respect to dyed hair, you know? The most cynical of all. Youth is such a wonderful thing. Bad luck we waste it on children, you know? You know where the word teenager comes from? It comes from the Latin word tiona. You know what it means? Grief, strife, and misery, you know? We really know how to kind of like treat our young people, you know? Amazing. But you know what? Start to look at the assets they bring. I mean, young people are incredible cooperators. They collaborate well. They're passionate about the critical issues today. You know, whenever I do a presentation, I need a 12-year-old there to kind of like run it. You know, they understand technology and stuff. And you know what? They know what other young people kind of like thinking and can contribute far better than we can. That's just a start. You know, young people bring some incredible assets. And as one young South African put it to me, youth are the leaders of today, not tomorrow. We are assets, not liabilities. We're solutions, not a problem to be solved. You know, we've got to begin to take this group serious. We've got a great initiative that we're running in Australia called Are You Mad? It's funky, it's different, you know, and what's it stand for? Are you making a difference? We've got kids as young as 6, starting with what their passions are in creating a project. You know, there's 3 levels of madness that they can engage in. There's 8 levels of kind of like madness in terms of how you put a project together. An amazing little tool. Just go onto the website, you can download it and whatever. We run a copy left, not a copy right rule. You can pinch anything, you know. Look at this. This is an Are You Mad project. That's a 12-storey ugly water tower. But here's a group of young men who have artist talent, wanting to show what that talent's like. A group of Indigenous young males often discounted by Australian society. And as this guy said to me, us black fellas don't like heights. But look at this. Isn't that amazing? Absolutely amazing. I can tell you, every time they drive past that, there'll be a sense of pride of what they've actually contributed. Absolutely amazing. And you know, we've got to believe this. Every single person has capacities, abilities, gifts and ideas, and living the good life depends whether you use it. It's directly related. And I had a personal experience of this. I was young. I hadn't seen an uncle for 30 years. He'd gone off as a truckie and he'd trucked all over Australia. He'd kind of like become an alcoholic and a drug taker. He was the black sheep of the family. But suddenly, 30 years on after I'd seen him, I got a phone call to say, your uncle's dying. He's an acute diabetic. We just amputated both of his legs. He's lying in hospital covered in bed sores. He has 3 months to live, and he's asked if you could be contacted to see whether you could bring him home to his village and to the family so he could live out those last 3 months. You can imagine. And the hospital added, don't worry, we've already contacted the local village hospital and they're willing to park him in the hospital. Amazing. And so my uncle Les comes back. You can imagine he's lying there, covered in bed sores, depressed. The doctors had told him he's got 3 months to live. Everyone wanted to talk about his state, about his disabilities. But one day there was a mad orderly in the hospital. I'll never forget this guy. He was 19. He sits on his bed and he says, Les, I don't want to talk about your disabilities. I want to talk about your abilities. Our town has a challenge. We no longer have a courier service between the village and the capital, Perth. It's 100 kilometres away. What about going into business and starting up a transport service between our town and the capital?